Start.
It is now 2014 and the 19th of December is approaching. My father, Chandrakant Sunarkar, whom we fondly called Tata, would have reached his 100th year on the 19th of December this year. I've therefore decided to make this little blog and post some videos on it and some photographs and perhaps some interesting letters, notes, etc. as a homage to him on this 100th anniversary of his. In this video, I'm going to present to you a brief glimpse of his life history. Tata was born in 1914, as I said, in Karwar. At the time, his father, that is my grandfather, was working in the salt department. The salt department, which is now known as the Customs and Excise Department. Of course, this was the British government and my grandfather worked for the British government. Tata was one of 11 siblings. So, most of his life was centered around his brothers and sisters. They were all good friends and all their childhood was playing with one another, some cousins and some friends. Tata did his early schooling in Uran. Of course, they moved only along the coast, for salt was being produced only along the coast and it was the only item which was being taxed. But Uran was where he started his early studies and later on continued his studies in Pune, in what is known as Nanavada. As I tell you this story, I'm also going to give you little anecdotes as I know them. And one is about the school. One day when I was studying in school, I came back and I told my father that the Loyola High School had beaten Nanavada by more than 14 goals. At the time, I also explained to him that whereas the kids from Loyola, that is my school, were playing with football boots, the children from Nanavada were playing barefoot. My dad immediately sent a kit of 15 pairs of shoes to Nanavada for their team. But that was my dad. Tata was always a very generous soul. I'm not going to comment about his personality in what I'm going to tell you, which is basically going to be his life story. And I will leave it to others to talk about him. After finishing his school at Nanavada, my father joined the Wadia College in Pune and later on the engineering college, but this time in Karachi. The interesting fact was, at that time there were only 120 engineering seats in the whole of India. 60 of them were in Pune and 60 of them were in Karachi. My father obviously couldn't make it to the 60 in Pune, but did manage to get an admission in Karachi. At the time, his eldest brother, Dada Kaka, was living there, and therefore it was not a big deal for him to move there. He completed both his electrical and mechanical engineering, and he told me that he did his electrical just to study one more year, as it was very difficult for the engineers to get jobs at that time. Imagine, with only 120 engineers in the whole of the country, it was difficult for all of them to get jobs. After completing his engineering in Karachi, Tata moved back to Maharashtra, came to Kirloskar Wadi, and got his first job as an executive assistant to S.L. Kirloskar, who had just come back from MIT and was set to head his family company's operations in Kirloskar Wadi. The job earned him a sum of rupees 30 per month. But my father never failed to tell me that every day he bought himself the Times of India. He would pay 1 anna per day for the Times, and this would take up nearly 7% of his income. But this was a habit he continued through most of his life. Around this time, it so happened that Dada Kaka moved to Calcutta. And since my father was not very comfortable living by himself, he thought that it might be a good idea if he could find a job in Calcutta, which he promptly did. He joined Jessup and Company as a design engineer and started his life's love, which was engineering design. Tata was always an entrepreneur, and he told me that even in the early days when he was working in Jessup and Company, he was always looking for products which could be manufactured in India and for which he could set up a factory. It was also around this time that my parents' marriage was arranged, and Tata married I at this time. My mother, of course, was young and naive and believed that she was marrying an artist, for she was told by her father that the boy she was getting married to did some work related to drawings, etc. He did work with Jessups for a while, but then later decided to move to Cooper Engineering in Satara. Obviously, the move was influenced by my mom because this was much closer to her hometown, which was Pune, of course, and she could be closer to her family. Tata and I have very fond memories of their life in Satara, where they lived in a tin shed. As destiny would have it, their closest friends at that time were Mr. Mantri and Dr. Patil. All three of them were to become stalwarts in the machine tool industry in India, with Mr. Mantri leading Cooper Engineering and Dr. Patil going on to become the chairman of HMT. Both these organizations produced over 70% of the machine tools produced in the country at one time. At the time, they were friends in Satara, of course. Uh, Both Mr. Mantri and Dr. Patil were bachelors and were looking for some home cooked food from my mom. But incidentally, my mom was not a great cook. But the three seemed to enjoy whatever she cooked. A few years later, an opportunity came up when a gentleman from the Punjab who was in the iron and steel business wanted to start a factory manufacturing lathes in the Punjab. For this, he needed what was then known as a general manager or a person to head the operations. The advertisement for this, of course, appeared in the Times of India, and my dad's habit of subscribing to it paid off. For this was one of the most expensive, one of the most highly paid jobs in the country at that time. And on his application, he got it. Having been educated in Karachi, it was not difficult for him to make the move. And for a salary of rupees 700, it was worth the trouble. By this time, my sisters Tai and Sa had been born, and so the whole family moved to Batala, a small town in Punjab where the company, Batala Engineering Company, this was the company he joined, had its foundry. In Batala, things moved along and were not very eventful, though both I and Tata enjoyed their stay there and loved everything about the Punjab. Of course, all this was so until the partition was announced. An interesting anecdote during this time relates to the sale of Kirloskar pumps. My father had always been in touch with Mr. S.L. Kirloskar, and one day he received a letter from Mr. S.L. Kirloskar telling him that he had heard that there was a good market for agricultural pump sets in Punjab, and could my father give him some leads. My father did give him leads for sale of agricultural pump sets, but the crown sale was the one he made to the Maharaja of Kashmir. The Maharaja of Kashmir was in the process of renovating the Shalimar and other gardens, and all the fountains of these beautiful gardens have pumps manufactured by Kirloskar and sold by my father. The partition was announced, and this meant trouble. There was, at that time, violence brewing, and due to the uncertainty of whether Batala would go to Pakistan or remain in India, being a border town, the underlying violence had already started moving. My father told me that he was aware that weapons, swords, etc. were being manufactured in his foundry in the night shift, but there was little he could do. He was also caught in another problem. He had, of course, sent back my mom and my sisters to Pune, where they were staying with my grandfather. But he himself could not leave Batala. This was because the owner of the factory had gone to Germany to buy some machine tools left over from the Second World War. However, since he was away in Germany, my father could not leave the factory until he returned. The violence was growing, that there were massacres on trains, and my father was left to take the last train out of Pakistan. My father got on this train, and Mr. Latif, the owner of the factory, sent with him two Pathans. My father describes them as 6'4", holding open broadswords, and they sat on either side of him as the train moved out of Batala. What he saw after that, he says, is violence of a kind which nobody should have ever seen. However, the two Pathans sat silently beside him, and the train moved, stopping and moving as people pulled chains, and ultimately reached Amritsar. On reaching Amritsar, the two Pathans got up, told him, "Saab ji, aapka mulk aa gaya, your country has come," and my dad thanked them and got off the train. The two Pathans returned back to Pakistan. He always believed that the two of them had saved his life, and but for them there was no way he could have survived. Tata, of course, had to now start his life all over again. He immediately got his job back at Cooper Engineering, and my parents moved back to Satara. This time, of course, they were better off. But just as life was getting back to normal, Gandhi was assassinated, Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, and as a repercussion, there was very severe violence in Miraj and Satara. My parents came back to Pune, to the safety of my grandfather's house, and were living there. During all this time, from the time he left Batala to this time, my father had been keeping indifferent health, and Tata went to the doctors, and the doctors diagnosed him for TB. TB at that time was a dreaded disease, and was considered fatal. He was advised complete rest. He had to live by himself, so he was sent to a sanatorium in Panchgani, where he lived by himself, and my mother and my sisters continued to live in Pune with my grandfather. His life was slowly coming to an end, and only a miracle would save him. This ends the first part of my father's life story, and I will come back in the second half with another video.